I was provided with a gavel, so it seemed like a good thing to do. I call this meeting to order at 6:30 on the 6:31 of the City Council Chambers clock. I'm Doug Johnson. I'm the chair of the Development Review Board. Kevin Lumpkin, who's the vice chair, is at the end of the table. Harlan Miller, who's the secretary of the DRB, is on my left, and Aaron Goyette, who's a member of the committee, is on my right. We're missing a member and an alternate, but we have a quorum and are able to proceed. I want to remind everybody in the room, I suppose one of the duties as the chairman is to maintain order, you see. So I don't know whether the city felt that these proceedings were excessively rambunctious in the past. We have been through several iterations of dealing with the Main and Mansion project. I haven't felt that way. I really don't feel I need this, but it is nice to know I have an authoritative way of commanding attention if
Hopefully
needed.
you don't need to use it.
No, I don't expect to need it. I don't plan to need it. But I do want to remind everybody, if there is somebody in the room who considers themselves to be an interested party, but has not signed in on the sign-in sheet, that you need to do that at the very latest before you leave the room here tonight. If you have second thoughts, having not signed in, you do have a grace period in which you can notify the city in writing that you do wish to be an interested party. All Vermont public meetings are supposed to begin with an invitation to anybody who has a public comment that they wish to make it. And so we will do that now.
You're already off agenda. You missed
Oh, dear.
changes to the agenda.
I guess I'm, true. I am indeed off the agenda. I'm supposed to ask if there are any changes to the agenda.
No.
Are there any changes to the
I
agenda?
have no changes.
Thank you for keeping me on the agenda. No changes, so we proceed with the agenda as published. If anybody has a public comment, please keep it brief, and we will hear it now. Hearing or seeing no one interested in making a public comment, we assume that all comments will be reserved for later as the content for the meeting. Okay. I've introduced the members of the committee. We have only one case to deal with on this occasion, and that is to consider an appeal of the zoning administrator's decision on, oh yes. Yes, all right, yes. Before we begin, there is one item of business that we need to deal with as a committee, and that is to approve the previous meeting minutes. Does anybody have changes or suggestions or additions or subtractions to the minutes as presented? Okay. So I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes as read. All in favor?
Sorry, so moved.
True. Thank you, Kevin. We have a motion. Any second for that?
Second.
Harlan seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? The motion carries. Now, we have item 4, which is the regular scheduled meeting that's supposed to be coming up on the 21st of November, and I want to announce to the committee as well as to the general audience that that meeting will not be held because we don't have an agenda for that meeting. There are no decision items for that meeting. And the next meeting of the Development Review Board will take place on the 19th of December, if necessary. All members of the Committee devoutly hope it will not be necessary and that we can pass on to the new year with a clean slate. But we will see. All right. Now, I think I get to begin the process of dealing with the current night's main point of agenda, which is the appeal of the zoning administrator decision with respect to the ZA's decision about the status of the 18 Mansion Street property and its relationship to the Mansion Street project and how that particular piece of landscape can be used. So we have, so that I need to, even though this is boilerplate in a sense, and everybody has probably heard it ad nauseum, I need to say that the Development Review Board is a quasi-judicial board within the city of Winooski. Our case, the current case will be called. The applicants who will be giving testimony to the board will be sworn in. The board will ask the applicants questions. Members of the audience can also ask questions after being sworn in and after the appellant has presented their evidence. It's important to know that if you want to be an interested party, you need to declare that before the board makes a decision about the case, either by signing the interested party list, which is on the table across the way from me, or by notification to the city by letter. Once the board makes a decision, the case can only be appealed by the appellant or by the applicant or by those who have declared themselves interested parties. The Development Review Board is the last stop in the city of Winooski. Appeals are heard in the Environmental Division of Vermont Superior Court. Is it Superior Court or Supreme Court?
Superior.
Superior Court. Okay. Now, I should swear in everybody who wishes to give testimony, both appellant and others who know at this point that they wish to give testimony to the board. A second chance will be offered to anyone later on who does not swear now and suddenly decides they wish to speak. But let's try to do the bulk of it all as one. So anybody who plans to speak, raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in these proceedings?
Yes.
So sworn. So we begin by the appellant, who is going to do that? David, Jerry?
Just for a point of order, I think things are a little bit different this evening, because this isn't the initial hearing before the Development Review Board. You specifically asked that the city show you how the proposed use of the RC lot on Mansion Street complies with the ULUDR. So it would appear to me that the burden of proof of going forward rests with the city. We do want to be heard on this matter, but we think they should be heard first. They may say the same things that we want to counter or address in our remarks.
So
What do we?
my take on that would be that my understanding of the procedural posture, and Bob can probably help us out on this, is that we have, in our last hearing, sent an issue back down to the city and ruled in the applicant's favor in 2 issues, which I understand are now up in the environmental court. So we essentially remanded to the city for further determination whether a permit could issue under the guidance that we set forth. And the city came back with a decision. I understand that decision is yes, a permit can issue. So a second permit or an amendment to a permit was issued. That's now on appeal here. So I don't know how that would change the the burden of proof, and I don't know that it would change the order of presentation of evidence. We typically hear from appellants first when it's an appeal of the ZA decision, but we'll certainly, we have a habit of going back and forth until everybody's said what they want to say in response to other folks. So my preference would be to hear from the appellants first, if only because that's
the precedent.
always how we do it.
Sure.
So Bob, am I right that the only issue, we're past the lot consolidation and the, what was it, neighborhood manners issues? Were the
That is correct. The only matter that's being appealed now is the addendum that the zoning administrator issued on July 24th.
Correct.
And the others are up in the E-court pending.
The lot consolidation is before the environmental court. That was not remanded back to this body.
They've not decided on that, correct?
The environmental court has not decided the issue of that particular zoning permit relating to the lot consolidation.
Right.
Chairman?
Okay, thank you very much. Again, my name is Joe Gamache. I live on Mansion Street. And I want to thank you for the opportunity of finally being able for everybody to get together to decide this matter. It's been a while since we last met. And we're here, I think, basically for what should be a very simple reason. We all know that the form-based code applies to gateway districts, not the RC lot in question here. And you gave the zoning administrator very specific questions that you had concerns with. In your decision of July 9th, you indicated in paragraph 12, it is the DRB's view that the planned use of the portion of the RC district must comply with all of the regulations governing that district in the ULUDR. You went further in paragraph 19I of your decision in which you said, the zoning approval as it relates to the portion of the lot in the RC district is reversed and remanded for a separate determination by the zoning administrator as to compliance by the applicant with the regulations applicable to the RC district for that portions of the lot. Compliance is defined by Mr. Webster as conformity in fulfilling official requirements by the letter. By the zoning administrator's addendum decision of July 24th, he specifically states, first, the ULUDR does not contain provisions that explicitly govern properties that contain more than one zoning district. And two, similarly, section 6.10 of the ULUDR limits the issuing of a zoning permit based on a project, not on a zoning district. Therefore, no clear guidance is provided for documenting approval across multiple districts. Now, I don't know why he needs to qualify that answer, because there is, by saying that there's no clear guidance in the code, there's absolutely no mention of split zoning developments in the code. And also, if in fact this were widely known by him for such a long period of time, why did it take him so long to come to that conclusion? I mean, we addressed this exact issue in the very first DRB hearing, what the use could be of the RC lot. And he never said anything. He'd known about this zoning problem with the lot. In fact, had discussed it with Mr. Mungin and all of his staff since September of 2018, when they were talking about the zoning problems related to the RC lot. He refers to it in his email, which is attached as Exhibit 2 to our notice of appeal, as the westernmost part of the lot, which is the Mansion Street lot. Now, the zoning administrator doesn't like your question about how this lot and what is being proposed for use complies with the code, because it doesn't. He changes the question you ask him from compliance to being consistent with, to whether the proposed use of the RC lot can be used in the way in which they're proposing that it be used. And it can't, because it does not comply with any bylaw that involves split zoning under our code. Now, consistent with is defined again by Webster as tending to be arbitrarily close to the true value of the parameter estimated. Being consistent with something and complying with something are two totally different and distinct things. By example, it's consistent to say that parking is allowed in all of the zoning districts in the city of Winooski. Whether or not it complies with that depends on the circumstances in the zoning district that you're in. They're two totally separate and distinct things. And he can't answer your question because no zoning bylaw exists. The duties of the zoning administrator are very specifically and clearly set forth in 24 VSA 4448A, entitled Powers of the Zoning Administrator. The administrative officer shall administer the bylaws literally and shall not have the power to permit any land development that is not in conformance with those bylaws. Again, going back to Mr. Webster, literally is defined as adhering to fact or to the ordinary construction or primary meaning of a term or expression. Conformance is defined as an action in accordance with some specified standard or authority, to be similar or identical, to be in agreement or harmony. You can't comply with something, with a bylaw, that isn't even included in the code. A bylaw that doesn't exist in this case, which applies to split zoning. We're not dealing here with some vague, arbitrary, non-specific term contained in a bylaw that's been duly adopted and in a code. We're not dealing with that at all. What we're dealing with here, well, before I get to that, what in that kind of a situation, you do have the ability to go to other sections of the code to see how that might help you define the already existing and duly adopted bylaw. That's not what we have here. How are zoning bylaws supposed to be adopted? Very clearly spelled out in the statute. The only way that you get a zoning law adopted is by going through this process, which is first the planning department, planning commission, studies, holds public hearings on, and if they feel the zoning bylaw is needed or necessary and it meets their criteria, they send it off to the city council for the city council's review, for them holding public hearings. And if they feel it's in the best interest of the city, they duly adopt the bylaws, that bylaw. That's how you get a bylaw that is to be administered by the zoning administrator. The zoning administrator, by issuing these permits that he's talking about, is clearly invading the province of the Planning Commission and the City Council, especially as it relates to this split zoning. And he can't do that. That has to come through the process I just spoke of. And as far as we're concerned, that is game, set, and match for the appellants. We win on that. The zoning administrator has to take the code as it is prepared. Substantive guidance or not, and I'll get into a little bit about that. He can't create his own bylaws under the form of substantive guidance. He can't do that. He can look to, if in fact there's a bylaw that is included in the code, he can then look for guidance on how to interpret that, but he can't invade the province of the Planning Commission and zoning and City Council and come up with his own bylaw. It's not there. And you know something, him saying, well, there's an old adage that if you really want to know what somebody believes they can do or that they can't do, you don't look at what they say, you don't look at what they argue, you look at what they actually do. On May 9th of 2019, I went to a Planning Commission meeting that was dealing specifically with split zoning. And this is long before any decisions were made, any permits were issued, any appeals were made, any memoranda were either in support of or against were filed with for consideration before any appeal was taken to the environmental court. And the Planning Commission knew that there was this hole in their code and that they needed help and guidance on how to fix it. Fix a split zoning situation. And they went to the zoning administrator and asked for his expertise, asked for a proposed bylaw on how we deal with this thing. I mean, up until now, if you read the submissions by Mr. Vorwall, I got it. I got everything. I can consolidate. I can do this administratively. We don't need anybody else involved to make this decision that needs to be made on the split zoning issue. You would think that the immediate advice that he would give the Planning Commission would be, hey, no problem, I got this. We don't need another bylaw. We don't need anything because, as I said, either through substantive guidance or lot consolidation or through administratively, I can handle all of this stuff. We don't need anything. That's not what he advised the Planning Commission, who was seeking professional advice from him on how to do that. What he did is he made a recommendation to them, and I've got the minutes and the proposed wording for his split zoning guidelines that I'll give to you, and you can see. These are words that come from him, not from me. And I also want this to be included in the record, if you please.
Mr. Chairman, mark that as Exhibit BB.
So in this sense, what the zoning administrator is telling the Planning Commission that they need to think about, seriously think about, is how to handle these split zoning situations is, first and foremost, there's only going to be one zoning district in every lot. So that means, for instance, in this situation, if they wanted it all to be governed under the form-based code, they would have to apply first to the Planning Commission, and then if the Planning Commission, they do their thing, as I described earlier, and then it gets sent off to the City Council, and they adopt it. If they adopt it that way, then that's fine. Then you're good to go. And if you don't, if either the planning commission or the zoning folks shoot it down, you still have an opportunity to appeal that decision. Guess where? To you, the Development Review Board, under a conditional review, on a conditional use review. He's not saying anything about, oh, I'll take care of this. I can do all of this stuff administratively. He wants to be as far away from this split zoning stuff as possible. And it only makes sense.
So can I ask a question about
Sure.
the planning commission?
Sure.
So one view of the planning commission taking up an issue and saying, hey, we need a bylaw for this, might be it's ambiguous as is, and reasonable minds could differ as to how to interpret the code.
Mm-hmm.
So why isn't this just a situation where some folks could interpret it as saying, sure, the parking lot can serve this because it's consolidated, even though it's in the wrong district. Others could say, no, you have to keep everything within RC. I mean, it sounds to me like you're saying it was crystal clear, like right there in the text, you can't do it. But isn't planning taking it up an acknowledgement that there is some ambiguity?
I'm not so sure they're taking it up that there's an ambiguity. There's no ambiguity. It's not mentioned at all in the code. And I'm offering this more for the purpose of what was in his mind. Why is he telling the planning commission that that what they should do is go to planning and zoning and go through that routine, and if that doesn't work, come back to you, when after this, he's sitting here arguing in all of these submissions that he's made to the Development Review Board that, hey, I can do all this stuff. Why didn't he say that to the Planning Commission? We don't need this. I can do it. And he doesn't say anything about that.
I think we also, if I could just
Sure.
jump in here, I think it's also important to, again, go back to the form-based code, because one of the key things of the form-based code is the administrative approval that the zoning administrator has. That's the whole core of it to approve these projects. And that code is very specific. It applies to the Gateway District only. So if you're consolidating this and bringing in an RC's lot, it doesn't apply anymore. And that's very clear, because I think the drafters of the form-based code wanted to have it affect a certain area of the city and a certain area of the city only.
Sorry,
And
can you back up a sec? Are you arguing that by consolidating the portion that is within the Gateway District has to be treated as RC? Or
no, what I'm saying is the same thing that Joe's saying. It's not allowed. It's not in the code. There's nothing in the code that allows that. And it certainly doesn't allow, as the zoning administrator contends, that it's an approval guaranteed by right under the code, which is what it is under the form-based code. But this isn't a form-based code project. This is a Gateway District project with an RC lot included in it. And I tried to make this point to the board on one of the previous times that, you know, you are allowing a larger project than could be built in the Gateway District by allowing the use of this lot. Whether it's correct or not, you are expanding the size of, and that's not what the drafters of the form-based code wanted. They said, here's the strip of land going through Winooski. You can develop anything along those lines, and you can do it with this, and it can be approved administratively. No one else has tried to bring in another lot, tried to increase the size of their project through another zone lot. And in fact, as we discussed, it's not in the code. It's not anticipated. I have several parts of the form-based code that really, again, describe the differences. Because again, remember, they've approved this project, the whole project, under a certificate of conformity, which is form-based code. And I would argue that section 102, applicability, states, the code is in effect for that part of the city of Winooski, Vermont, designated in the Winooski zoning map as the Gateway Districts. So it sets it very specifically. 103, purposes, states, the code shall be applied to new infill development and redevelopment within the Gateway District, both in order to achieve the vision set forth and to provide a mechanism for implementing following specific goals using public and private sector investments. One of the goals, number 5, is to ensure complementary relationship between the corridors and the surrounding neighborhoods. So the code itself has clearly defined that there is the Gateway District and the surrounding neighborhoods. And I don't think there's anything in there about merging those. And actually, finally, it does allow in the form-based code, the regulating plan delineates the street space and other public open space and provides specific information on the development parameters for parcels within the Gateway District. The regulating plan shows how each lot or development project relates to the street space and the surrounding neighborhood. The regulating plan may identify additional regulations and/or special circumstances for specific locations. There is nothing in here about a split zone lot or how that would apply. So it would seem as though they would need to ask for that type of a change. And again, that type of a change goes to the Development Review Board for decision.
It certainly shouldn't be allowed to be done administratively.
I'm sorry, that power that is given to the zoning administrator under the form-based code is a very powerful tool, and it's a very powerful thing. It bypasses all regulation, as long as it meets these very specific, defined in the form-based code parameters. And if you start to allow the use of another lot outside of that as being part of a gateway project, that just seems like that's not what the drafters of the form-based code intended.
Okay, can we accept this point as having been made and move on to other points that you might have in your presentation? So that we can then ask you questions about
Sure,
the totality, rather than to spend too much time on a point that I think is made.
Well, that being said, our position is that just on the basis of there being no bylaw that allows for split zoning, and in essence what's happened here is Eric's created his own bylaw, which can't be done. It needs to be done by planning and zoning. That is, in and of itself, that's gain set match for the appellants. Now, there's some discussion also, he seems to think that there's this substantive guidance where he can go out and pick from various portions of the code that will allow him to create his own bylaw to implement what he wants to have happen here. And he can't do that. And at least if you're gonna try to grab some substantive guidance, let's use apples to apples. I mean, what he cites you to is uses in Article 2, dimensional standards in Article 2, and specific use standards in Article 5. Then he further cites you to the zoning bylaws relating to signs, swimming pools, fences, walls, decks, and patios. What does that have to do with parking? And specifically parking in a zone that is not going to provide parking for any structure on that lot, but rather a building in a separate zoning district. And the permitted use table, section 2.4, doesn't allow this at all. What that at least calls for is conditional use review by you folks. Now, we submitted 2 things. We went through the code and came up with the things that we think are much more in line with what is actually going to happen on that lot, which is a standalone parking lot or an accessory use. Of course, Eric doesn't want to hear that because a standalone parking lot is only allowed in a commercial district, and the accessory use only applies after, or it has to go through you folks for conditional use review. So he doesn't want to use any of those. In concluding my remarks, in the event you determine that the RC portion of the lot can't be used for parking, that does not prejudice Mr. Mungin whatsoever. He can still develop his RC portion of the lot under the Gateway District. Excuse me, he can still develop the Gateway District under the form-based code to the full extent allowed. He can still develop the RC District lot to the full extent allowed under the ULUDR. Or he can wait and make a determination, wait until the city council and planning folks make a determination on how they're going to handle these lots. In essence, he's being treated like everybody else. Nobody else has had the audacity or the gall to come in here before you and say that they should be allowed to grab a residential lot in connection just so they can increase the size of their gateway district. Nobody has done it, and I think that's very telling. He's treated like everyone else. Now, those of you DRB members, and I know there are, who attended many of the form-based code meetings and what was considered in there, I mean, you know that this type of development involving grabbing a residential lot was never contemplated as being allowed. And for all the reasons we've discussed in our appeal here, it shouldn't be allowed, and legally it cannot be allowed. So, Dave, do you have any other remarks?
No, I think that's
Okay,
the
thank you. Are there questions from board members?
Can I ask a hypothetical question? So, parking, I think the point of signed swimming pools, decks, etc., is that parking is thought of as part of development of a lot, but not the actual thing on the lot. It's typically serving something else. And the debate here is whether it can serve a portion of the lot that is within the same administratively consolidated lot, but in a different district. And I understand your position to be, no, if it's serving a structure, it has to be like anywhere else in the RC district. It has to serve a structure on that portion of the lot. So imagine if there were a small structure on that portion of the RC lot, but like just as much parking, and it served both. What would that do to your argument? So essentially, you keep the mansion, build some other structure, build a tiny house, something that would be, and plenty of things go through the ZA without coming to us, because a lot of things are permitted uses, and they come to us properly on appeal. So they build something, it's got all this parking, and it happens to also serve this thing in the gateway district. Would that be permissible to your?
I don't believe so, because then I think you're into the accessory use. If it's going to be used for parking in any way, shape, or form for the lot, for the structure in the separate district, I think you're into an accessory use.
Well, we don't think of parking typically as an accessory use. It's just something that is, we understand is required for, there's a minimum of parking for just about every piece of development, and there's no maximum. So it's not really an accessory the way that, say, like a detached cottage would be. It's just something that's part of the lot, and I think that's the point of signs, et cetera, et cetera. Like a swimming pool is regulated separately, but we think of it as just part of the lot. Does that make sense?
I think I understand where you're going, but I still don't see that as, I mean, by definition of an accessory use, I mean, a use, activity, structure, or part of a structure that is subordinate and incidental to the main activity or structure of the lot. And then they go on and on and on from that. I mean, I don't see how, you can't have it both ways here, because you've got an RC lot and you've got the gateway lot. And ne'er the twain shall meet, not because I say it, but because the code doesn't allow for that. And until such time as the code allows for that, you can't do this. That's our position, Kevin.
So there are no land uses on that lot that you could envisage as being compatible with its residential zone character, and the fact that it is under residential use law.
No, I think what there's there now is fine. And I think you can put up to a triplex on that lot, and that would be allowable, as long as it offered parking for the folks on that lot.
And presumably you could put grass, tear down the house and just have lawn and grass and open space for the apartment behind there. Because
So-
that's a permitted use.
So would swing sets, for example, or some other kind of recreational use be considered a compatible use in your terms? Or say the property were covered in permeable stone, right? Either kept in rolled gravel or these paving mechanisms that permit water to filter through and so on. Would
With
that
no
be-
structure?
Well, yeah, what would a no structure kind of use be besides grass?
A lot. I mean, I'm not trying to be difficult here, but I just don't, I guess I'm not following you.
It's the parking that you don't like as being
It's a
compatible, because it isn't linked to a building or a structure on the lot. Is that correct?
That's true, yeah.
Not on the lot, within the district.
Let me flip it the other way.
Yes, I'm not talking about the gateway district, I'm talking about the appended lot.
It's all one lot now.
So
Well,
can,
that would be some kind of conditional use that you folks would have to decide was an acceptable use. But, I mean,
so,
I think the point we're trying to make is this is not governed by the form-based code. So it doesn't fall under, this project doesn't fall under that. It has to go as a conditional use to the DRB, which is, that's the only alternative other than that. And it says that in the form-based code as well. If it doesn't apply, if the form-based code doesn't apply, it has to go to 6.7 and go through the.
let me flip it the other way down Mansion Street. Imagine this wasn't lot on Main Street and lot behind it on Mansion. Imagine it was the second and third lot. So
Mhm.
both on Mansion, both within RC, same owner. We administratively consolidate those lots and we take down the house on one of them and it turns into a parking lot that serves the structure, say a triplex or whatever, on the other. Would that be permitted in your mind?
No,
Why not?
no, because you're in a residential district.
Why would you, as the DRB, approve 10, let's say you could fit 10 spaces on that lot, why would you approve 10 spaces for a residence that needs 4? Just because the guy wants to make that many parking spaces on his lot and pave it over, even though he's gonna use permeable, you wouldn't allow it.
He
Well-
expects a lot of visitors.
So we've got specific standards, right? And there's kind of 3 types of uses. There's permitted uses that
Yeah.
get a permit from the ZA that can be appealed.
Yeah.
And we found that folks are very good at appealing when they want to. There's conditional use, which is either specifically defined or something that's not really in the code. And then there's can't do it, right? So my question is, there's no maximum on parking, and there's the surface calculations that you could
Yep.
comply with. Given that we don't have a maximum in parking and both of those lots would be in the RC, couldn't you just have a big lot with a bunch of parking that serves an unusually small structure because there's a lot of guests or whatever?
You said there's a parking problem on the street, and somebody wants to put in a bunch of parking spots on their
I'm
lot,
just trying
and
to
all of a
test
sudden you're
the
against it?
limits of
In his situation?
Well, by a bunch, are you talking 75 units as opposed to 17 that are there now?
Well, no, I'm playing out Kevin's example here. The 3 lots RC.
But that's
They-
not really at discussion here, that's not really at issue here, is it?
right. So I'm trying to test where the limits of our ULUDR are, because sometimes that's helpful in deciding the issue in front of us, is figuring out, where the limits of our code are. And one of the quirks that makes this application somewhat difficult to my mind is that we don't have a parking maximum. As long as you comply with the parking minimum and the rest of the code, you can have as much parking as you want. So I'm trying to figure out how that affects this appeal.
Well, again, that's after you get over the hurdle of no split zones are allowed under the code. I mean, I guess if somebody wanted to tear down a house and have parking, if they really think that floats their boat, I mean, I guess you could do what you wanted to, but you're not dealing with split zoning, you're not dealing with gateway, you're not dealing with any of these things.
And you as the board would be able to decide about whether the cars were actually being used, whether they were applied to that residence, right? You can't have junk cars, right? You can't have 6 cars that don't run. You can't have a junk.
Most of that's actually not what we decide. We say, does it meet the code? Yes or no? And then if there's like
Well, wouldn't that be a
junkyard-
conditional use though? Wouldn't
I don't
that be a
think it
conditional
would.
use if you wanted to have a bunch of cars that you work on out in your backyard in a residential commercial zone?
It's really more of the land use and less of what that individual owner is using it for. So the parking lot comes to us. What's on top of the parking lot would be some other department in the city, like,
Okay. Okay.
public nuisance kind of thing.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm taking up too much time.
Any other questions? We are open for comments and questions and statements from the general public.
Well, I represent the applicant, am I gonna get a chance to?
Absolutely.
Okay. Do you want me to do that now?
Why not?
Okay.
Well, before you start, I've got a list of exhibits which provide the procedural foundation for these arguments. I'd like to report them out to the part of the record. I can do that now, I can do it after AJ has a chance.
Why don't you do it before AJ and then we can hear.
We have to do a lot of initialing of exhibits. Do y'all mind if we do that while we're definitely still listening to everything that you
So I'll take
say?
3
It
minutes
just,
of your time.
with this stack of exhibits, it's gonna take like 20 minutes to initial them all.
So,
Whatever you wanna do.
No, 20 minutes is too long. I mean, to initial use. You wanna go through and do all of them now?
I'm just gonna put into the record what these exhibits are.
I see, just read them off then.
Yes.
Yeah,
Then he's
sure,
gonna put
okay.
the stack on the table.
Yeah, I'm just
Okay.
anticipating that we can initial as
Okay, I'm with you.
at our
I'm with
leisure.
So I'm gonna announce a bunch of dates. Every date I announce is gonna be in 2019. I'll shorten this. Exhibit A is the DRB's July 1 decision on the initial appeal. Exhibit B is the zoning administrator's addendum to the certificate of conformity dated July 24. Exhibit C is the zoning administrator's memorandum dated July 24, announcing his decision. Exhibit D is the list of persons receiving a memorandum on the certificate of conformity addendum. Exhibit E is the Z card and posting of the photo for permit ZON 20-006 posted on July 24. Exhibit F is the appellant's notice of appeal, the cover letter, dated August 8. Exhibit G is the notice of public hearing from the Development Review Board for the hearing scheduled for September 19. Exhibit H is the Burlington Free Press proof of that notice. Exhibit I is an August 26 memorandum from the zoning administrator announcing September 19 hearing. Exhibit J is the list of persons receiving that memorandum. Exhibit K is the public photos and public hearing card posted on the property on August 26 concerning the September 19 hearing. Exhibit L is the agenda for that September 19 hearing. Exhibit N is the sign-in sheet for the September 19 hearing. Exhibit N is the minutes of the September 19 hearing. Exhibit O is the entry order from the environmental court dismissing without prejudice the appeal relating to the permit, which is now back here before the Development Review Board, and staying further action on the lot consolidation permit. Exhibit P is the notice of public hearing for today's hearing from the Development Review Board. Exhibit Q is the Burlington Free Press proof of publication for that notice. Exhibit R is the Burlington Free Press affidavit of publication for that same notice. Exhibit S is the October 15th memo from the zoning administrator advising of the public hearing scheduled for today. Exhibit T is the list of persons receiving that notice. Exhibit U is the Z card, zoning notice of public hearing and photos concerning that posting for today's hearing. Exhibit B is the agenda for today's hearing. Exhibit W is the draft minutes of the October 17 meeting of the Development Review Board, which I believe the board had just approved earlier in this meeting. Exhibit X is the agenda for today's meeting. Exhibit Y is a memo to the Development Review Board dated September 19 from the zoning administrator concerning the current appeal. Oh, I'm sorry, I may have misstated that. Yeah, this is a memorandum concerning the overview of the appeal submission, and Exhibit Z is the memorandum from the zoning administrator dated June 19 concerning the previous appeal. So that brings us to Z. Exhibit AA will be the sign-in sheet that people have signed, and Exhibit BB is the exhibit that Mr. Gamache submitted a couple minutes ago concerning the Planning Commission agenda from May 9th. So that's where we are with the list of exhibits, and that can be supplemented with additional sessions.
So just in addition, the thing that you referred to as the agenda also has proposed bylaws as prepared by Mr. Vorwall that was also submitted.
The record will reflect that.
Thank you.
Nothing further from us.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
Nothing further from us.
Not from us.
Bob, can you put that stack on
Do you want to just do this during deliberation? Do you want to do this during deliberation?
No.
That's a good idea. No, you want to.
Well, I mean, I think we can do it.
I would like to wait on this. Signing this?
Yeah, we can do it. Okay, we can do it when we need to close the.
Yes. We're going to sign this a little
Just
bit
keep
later.
it brief.
Okay. Sorry.
No, thank you. So, my name is AJ LaRosa. I am counsel for the applicant. And next to me is Greg Dixon, civil engineer for the applicant. Jeff can't be with us tonight. He's got a family issue he's trying to deal with. He asked that I read a statement from him to begin with that would constitute as his participation in the matter. So I'm going to do that for you now. And then I have some other comments. Dear board members, unfortunately I am unable to make tonight's meeting due to a family issue. I would like to thank the board members for committing their valuable time to ensure our city continues to progress within the strategic plan laid out by its citizens. Although I realize change is difficult for many people, I have respect for the two people that have raised concerns with this project. I intend to proceed with the utmost respect for those living on Mansion Street. Our goal is to ensure that they are impacted as little as possible during the construction process. As a developer, it is far too easy to take offense to appeals, but I've chosen to stay the course on following the applicable codes, and I will make all requested changes should the zoning administrator or the city officials require them. I have lived and owned property in Winooski for my entire life. The transformation of our city has been amazing. We have a long way to go, however. When you talk to others around the state, they view the progress in Winooski as a beacon of hope for what can happen when you encourage growth that is in line with a shared vision of the community members. Our old dilapidated buildings in Winooski are coming down. Young professionals are moving into the epicenter of this, moving into the city, and the city is becoming an epicenter for growth and excitement. Sorry, it's tough to read on my phone. The city is becoming increasingly vibrant. Winooski used to be the red-headed stepchild of Burlington, but because of the synergistic work of city government, Development Review Board, the citizens, the environment has caused folks to consider investing in improved housing, infrastructure, and business. These investments have been critical to the resurrection of Winooski and will continue to be critical if we want Winooski to reach its potential. However, we need some additional housing. In closing, our team has invested a tremendous amount of effort and resources toward ensuring that this project fits into the vision laid out in the Main Street Revitalization Project, and it does. It was designed in a way that is aesthetically pleasing, using high-quality materials and strong and impressive architectural features to act as a welcoming gateway for those exiting Winooski Circle onto the new and improved Main Street. We're excited to create a great residential and mixed-use space for future Winooski residents to live, work, and play. I would like to leave you all with a quote from Socrates that summarizes our feelings on this project. The secret to change is to focus all of your energy not on fighting the change and not on fighting the old, but on building the new. Don't be mad I messed that up. Thank you to the Development and Review Board and my team for all of your time. I look forward to participating in the continued progress of our community. Respectfully, Jeff. So I wanted to read that all because it's important to Jeff, and I think that sums up generally his feelings. From the beginning, Mr. Mungin has worked diligently, as requested by just about every zoning administrator and every bylaw across the state. When they first contemplated building this project, he went to the city and worked closely with the city to develop a project that fits with the regulations. The appellants attack that and try to present that as some sort of bias on Mr. Vorwald's behalf. I think you have to reject that. I think you have to really reject that. Mr. Mungin has worked as hard as he possibly can to get this project into a place that fits the regulations. And it does fit the regulations. Appellant sat up here for about 40 minutes and ranted and raved about something that has already been decided. This appeal, their notice of appeal, frames one issue: whether or not parking in the portion of one lot that serves a residential use on another portion of the lot is permitted. That's the question that you have. That is and fundamentally the question is the July 24th addendum addressing that issue satisfactory or not? It is not about lot consolidation. It is not about split zoning. It is not about what the Planning Commission said. None of that's in their notice of appeal. None of that's before you right now. There is one fundamental question, and the DRB framed it. In its decision, it wrote on paragraph 14, the DRB determines that the appeal with respect to zoning 19-60 shall be granted for the limited purpose of directing the ZA to reconsider the approval granted with respect to the portion of the lot in the RC district and to render a decision that is based solely on the RC zoning regulations in such a format as he deems appropriate. Now, they attacked and attacked and attacked Mr. Vorwald's decision to issue the administrative addendum, but you told him he could do that. He can do an administrative addendum. You specifically directed to it. In fact, the DRB's concern, if you look at your decision, was about process. The process concern that you all had originally was that the form-based code approval process appeared to an outsider like it had been used to address any quote-unquote development in the RC district. And specifically, in your decision, you directed Mr. Vorwald to clean that up. I'm paraphrasing. You didn't use the term clean it up. And in fact, he did. Let me back up a little bit. The question that is before us, and Kevin hit the nail on the head on this one, is whether or not parking in a portion of a lot that is zoned RC that serves a residential use in a portion of the same lot is appropriate. Kevin's question was, well, wait, if I have two lots in the RC district and I want to make a church, I'm going to use a church, which is a permitted use. Why can't I consolidate those lots, put a church in, and have 50 parking spaces next door? The answer is you can. Parking is not an accessory use. If that were the case, you would need an accessory use conditional use permit for every driveway in a residential district. You would need a conditional use permit for every parking lot. A B&B is an allowable use. You get one permit for the B&B. You don't get an accessory use conditional use permit for the parking that goes with the B&B. You don't get an accessory use conditional use permit for the parking that goes with the church, or the parking that goes with the ball field, or the parking that goes with the duplex. Parking on a lot is incidental and required as part of the permit submission to get the original permit. You don't get a duplex permit if you don't have parking. You don't need 2 permits, you get 1. They are inherent. Now, if there was no use on the lot, that would be a different question. But there is a use on the lot. What appellant's argument, as stated in their notice of appeal, continually misunderstands is that there is a lot. Now, what they are mad about is that there is a single lot. But that's a different issue, that's on appeal, that's not what's before you right now. For the purposes of tonight, there is 1 lot. It has been approved. There is a single lot. On that lot is residential uses and parking. That is allowed. That is allowed under the regulations. That is allowed inherently. It's just consistent with the regulations. Now, much was made about the term consistent versus compliance versus, I think that's, as a lawyer, it's going to be weird for me to say this, too cute by half and a bit semantics. Now, Kevin and I will admit we probably made plenty of our career choices based on semantics. But you directed Mr. Vorwald to review whether or not the development, quote unquote, in the portions of the lot that are zoned as RC are consistent with the regulations. And in fact, he did that. Statutorily, that is his obligation, to ensure that the zoning regulations are applied in a consistent, fair, reasonable manner, and that development conforms to the regulations. Now, I don't see how we get to many of the appellant's arguments tonight based on their notice of appeal. What they are doing is collaterally attacking the size and scope of the project in the form-based code district. That is what this has been about all the time. And that is what you heard tonight. You heard that they don't like that the Planning Commission hasn't taken up this issue. You don't like that there's a consolidated lot. That's really what this is about. What you didn't hear them do is substantively.
Yes.
I just
Wait
take
a
issue.
minute.
wait.
I was quiet while you talked. You're going to be quiet while I talk.
You can ask me a point of order.
Okay, that's what I was.
What is the
trying
point of order? It is
Sorry for the interruption.
it is better to hold comments and address them afterwards.
Sorry.
Get the gavel out.
Yeah.
Gavel everywhere.
My apologies too.
Standing gavel.
So what you didn't hear was a substantive argument rebutting the very simple fact that I made earlier, which is parking is not an accessory use. Parking is incidental to development on a single lot. And I'm sorry for getting a little inflamed, but we sat quietly for an hour while we rehashed stuff that was argued and argued and argued, and we're doing it again. And we're going to do it again, and maybe another time after that. But right now there's a simple question before you, and I think Mr. Vorwald's September 19th memo lays it out very clearly. I think his prior memos laid out very clearly. And I think the fundamental reality is you can have parking that serves a residential use on the same lot in the RC district or any other district.
So,
Can
sorry, go ahead.
I ask you a question?
Of course.
Hypothetical. All of the examples that are offered, that I have heard over the time this issue has been before us in various ways, have cited examples of use as parking for driveways, for churches and senior centers. You cite a church that tears down residences to support a use that is a permitted use in the residential the RC district. Right? This talks about a use that is not in the RC district, is not governed by RC district code, but is in the gateway. And yet the use is for something outside of the gateway. in your view, is that a permitted use?
I think you flipped it at the end. So I think what you're saying,
See, I have no problem with the lot consolidation.
right,
These things happen in all kinds of dimensions, in all kinds of situations. But this is a consolidation of a lot of property that was in the residential district, indisputably, and now is in common ownership with a lot in the development, in the Gateway District, governed by the code for that, the form-based code,
correct.
right? The issue is then, what is a permitted use for that residentially zoned portion that is compatible with the zoning regulations that govern residential zones, not the gateway,
That's right, right,
okay?
right, yep.
All right? My question is parking on that lot for a use that is not in the residential district, where all examples that we have exist are located, is that permitted when it's going to be used for something outside of that zoning district that is governed by a totally different set of regulations?
So I believe the answer to your question is yes.
Okay.
And let me try to break down a couple of ways I feel that. So number one, there's absolutely nothing in the regulations that says you can't do that. Okay. Number two, I believe that you are looking at that the lot aspect can't be overlooked. That you are looking at a single lot. And so when you have a lot with split districts, you still have one lot. So that you are still looking at residential parking for residential use on that lot, which is consistent with what is permitted or conditionally permitted in the residential district. It is unquestioned that you can park in the residential district
For
for,
a structure that is in the residential district.
yes, but it is also, there is nothing that prohibits you from parking on a portion of a lot that is in the residential district when the structure is outside the residential district. And there is nothing prohibiting it, and so you have to look, in that case, what is consistent and what is the intent of the regulations, I believe. And the intent of the regulations is to allow residential parking for residential uses on lots, and when there are split lots, you have to look at what the overall intent of the split lot is, and which is residential use.
Could I not argue that the intent of the residential code is to permit parking for use in the residential district and not outside of it? That is a perversion of the residential parking allowance.
I think that's what the appellants are arguing, but I think it's invalid because that again would separate the idea that there is one singular lot with a required amount of parking serving that use on that lot.
If I owned a property that straddled Colchester and Winooski, and I was an amateur astronomer, and I wished to build a tower in Winooski that was 75 feet tall to mount my telescope, but a structure that is larger than 65 or 60 feet is not allowed. But it would be allowed in Colchester because nothing was said about that kind of height. Would I be allowed to do that?
You need a permit from both. I forget the name of the case, but it's actually a South Burlington Shelburne case.
Really?
Yes.
Damn. Can't even be original in my...
I think it's a cell tower case, but there's a farm that straddles the town line where this happened. You need a permit from both, and if one says no, you can't do it.
Okay.
But I understand, I mean, I think that this is a unique, there's no dispute that this is a bit of a unique situation.
Sure.
But I think the city has reasoned through it adequately at this point, and I would ask that you follow the city's reasoning.
So here's where I start to get hung up. If you had two applicants, one of whom owned the Mansion Street residential portion and the other of whom owned the portion in the RC district.
Are
And
they
they-
separate lots at this point?
Right.
Okay.
Separate owners, so you can't administratively consolidate them. I think the correct analysis would be Gateway District, fine, the building complies, we already ruled on that. But within the RC, if the proposal is just to build a parking lot that serves this structure elsewhere that someone else owns, because we don't have the lot consolidation, then that would be a no-go.
I think that's correct.
Okay, so here's where I start to get hung up, and maybe you can come up with counterexamples. I generally think of ownership as agnostic to the outcome of questions like this. So if the outcome with two separate owners would be X, but then you had them come under common ownership, I'm struggling with how that changes the outcome of what you can do with each individual piece of land.
They're no longer individual pieces of land. There are one piece of land. So ownership may be agnostic, but the boundaries of the lot are not. It affects stuff like lot coverage. It affects stuff like density calculations. So if I own this piece of land and you own this piece of land, there's density calculation, the lot coverage, setbacks, all of that doesn't change. But if they get consolidated into one lot, now, common ownership, great. I mean, we may be able to come up with some sort of crazy joint ownership, or I don't know what kind of ownership structure. That's indifferent. Ownership's not actually that important for zoning purposes, but once the boundaries of the lot change, you're in a whole new ballgame.
The example of the setbacks.
That's right. Once you
All of a sudden-
consolidate it, the setbacks disappear, or the neighborhood manners boundary district has to move. I mean, so once the actual internal boundary is removed, you're in a very different situation.
But we agreed, I think last time, that the boundary of the zoning district doesn't change. So I think what I'm understanding the appellants to argue is that imagine a solid rectangle around these consolidated lots. You have to continue to imagine, say, like a dashed line going down the middle that has implications for the difference between what's permitted in the RC district and what's permitted in the Gateway district. And I think I'm still hearing you argue that this is mixing and matching in a way that's
No. If the consolidation, well, I want to be clear about that. If the lot was consolidated, right?
Okay.
That wouldn't allow, and I think that the board hit on this last time, that wouldn't allow a form-based code size structure or building to be put in the portions of the lot that are RC district coded. Off the top of my head, I don't remember a table of uses that well, but let's say, for example, large, well, I guess the point is just the building, for example. That's the best point, right? I'm not saying that you're blurring the zoning district boundaries at all. The zoning district boundaries stay as they are. So to your point, no, we're not mixing and matching. You couldn't put the building on the RC district lot.
You couldn't move it back from Main Street, in other words.
Well, I mean, I don't know how much further you couldn't like flip it sideways or something like that.
Yeah, so you couldn't build the building so it straddles that dashed line.
I think that's right.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yet the result would be, if you look at it in terms of practical result, the practical result is to move the boundary line.
In what way?
Because you're using it for a use that is inappropriate to the residential area and not in support of something in that area. And somebody could come along and, let's just say a ground floor user, one of the businesses that will come into one of the spaces that are planned for that building. And they need 25 parking spaces in a realistic way to be able to handle their business. So the owner of the properties on the consolidated lot buys out 2 more houses, takes down those houses, and builds a parking lot because it's in support of the business that's going on in that
Are you speaking about this project?
Oh, I'm taking any project that is proposed or is in existence that changes from a restaurant or from one commercial use on the ground floor of this structure and decides it needs more space, can apply and buys and consolidates the lot into a larger lot that allows for more parking, for more in and out kinds of use. This is a kind of practical, and there would be, if they were permitted to do that, this would be a kind of progressive invasion of residential zoning by the commercial development along the street.
So we did cover this in the last meeting. The parking lot in that zone is strictly residential. It is only used for residential parking.
Well, I'm concerned with the practical effect of what I would see as spot zoning. Right? In practice, you wouldn't expect that boundary, if, say that house hadn't sold, right? Say Mr. Mungin had not been able to buy that. There would be no issue of putting parking on that. Correct?
In what way?
A
Meaning
house sits there.
It would be a different owner.
Yeah,
It
it would be a
wouldn't be
different
part of
owner.
the project.
That's right. That's right.
That's right.
So Mr. Mungin buys that lot and
Well,
adds
let me ask you this.
No,
What-
wait, you can solve it, AJ.
Okay.
And then 10 years from now, somebody comes along and redoes the commercial use configuration on the bottom of the existing structure and buys the next two adjacent houses and takes them down and gets that lot consolidated with the form-based code lot, right? And suddenly it's possible to put parking on that. We have a kind of creep, never imagined when the form-based code district and the gateway corridors were established, into the residential community. That was never envisaged as something that might happen. But this precedent, wouldn't that establish a precedent that could be used in future?
Well,
With the same kind of arguments that you're using here?
Greg has a point first, and then I'll answer
Sure,
that.
okay.
Your hypothetical is still mentioning commercial parking within the RC zone. And that is not what we are proposing. And so hypothetical is not.
Point taken. I take that what you're saying is this is residential parking for residential use.
Right. And I understand that there is a hypothetical potential that you're flagging that I think exists in many zoning cases that is always a concern. What I would say is that concern could be addressed through changes to the zoning regulations, if that is a legitimate concern. However, as of today, they don't prohibit what is being proposed. This is something that could very easily be confronted if it is a concern to the city by adjusting the regulations to address this issue. And whatever I will speak with ignorance about your specific zoning proposal. I believe it's a planning commission and select board. If they chose to put in a particular proposal to deal with the creep that you're addressing, then by all means that would deal with it. And perhaps they should, but for now, what is before us satisfies the regulations as we read them. But I understand your concern about the hypothetical creep. I think on a hypothetical level, that's correct. It's a possibility. I think there are some limitations about that. If you're, someone could theoretically buy up an entire city block and put in all sorts of crazy things, right? But there are practical limitations to hypotheticals, just as there are practical implications to any other project. I'm not trying to downplay the concern. What I'm trying to say is there is a mechanism to deal with that, I think, if that is a legitimate concern that you see something happening.
Any other questions? Okay, we don't have any more questions of you guys. And we would like to move to a more public question period if anybody wishes.
Sure.
So I think we will do that.
Okay. So I leave now.
No, you can come and sit here. There may be some.
No, that's what I meant. I leave this table.
You can leave there if you want. You could continue to sit there for the right perspective.
Sure.
Whatever you wish to do.
Whatever you want me to do.
And God gosh, move over there
Yeah.
so we know where you are. Is there anybody in the general community who would like to make a brief statement to the DRB? Yes, sir.
I don't think
Could you just identify yourself?
My name is Jason Keyser. I live over on 15 Hood Street. I haven't been sworn in yet. I don't know if I have to before I...
Yes, you do.
Okay, just to make
Raise
sure.
your right hand, please. Do you swear the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
You are sworn in.
So I live on 15 Hood Street, which is one lot in from the Gateway District coming off East Allen Street. I just bought the house in August, actually. And this was brought to my attention because it is kind of concerning my property in a way, in the sense that if my neighbor decided to sell a very small lot, which would have a very minimal space for parking, would that mean that my lot and the house above me, which would be great parking space for that, could be consolidated into the Gateway District? I could sell it off for a great profit, I'm sure, to turn all of Hood Street into a parking lot. I'm just confused at how this administrative consolidation happens when it is part of a Gateway District. Who decides that this lot is now consolidated when it's just the same owner? You could buy up as many lots as you want and then say it's consolidated because you have one.
No, I believe it has to go through a process within the city.
Okay, I was just confused about how this consolidation happens, that you can do that. How did this become consolidated in the first place?
The details of the process, I don't know.
Okay, sorry.
Well, I can share this is just my perspective and just take it for what it is.
Yep.
The process is called administrative consolidation, and it's recognizing the fact that when you've got multiple owners of adjacent lots, for a lot of purposes, for example, listing on the grand list, taxation, etc., it makes sense, and in fact the law favors treating them as one big lot. And if you own multiple lots, you do have more options. If they're in the same zoning district, it's a really easy case, right? You know, you buy two lots together, you can put a house right in the middle, and that middle line no longer exists. What we're struggling with, I think, on all sides here, and what is yet to be decided, is what happens in the unique circumstance where that administrative consolidation crosses zoning boundaries.
Exactly.
And I think you're right to be concerned about what that means for your properties and your neighbors' properties. And we don't have the answer to that, and it probably won't be us who ultimately decides that question for Winooski. And it needs to be decided, right? We probably need more clear zoning regs, and we probably need a decision from a court above us saying what happens in this case. But we'll certainly
just wanted to
answer it in the first instance.
Just wanted to clarify what was actually happening here to make sure I wasn't missing something. Thank you.
Anybody else? Seeing no interest in questions, I will entertain a motion to close the public part of this meeting and move into a closed deliberation. Will somebody make a motion?
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion, it's been seconded, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Passes unanimously. We are out of public session and in closed deliberative session. We're going to leave this room. Anybody who wants to stay here for as long as the 2 hours and 57 minutes it takes for us. I was